In this video, I'm going to show you how you can create a sleeve vent, something like this that you'd see on a jacket. And this one's going to have a mitered corner at this point here. And you can choose whether to apply the buttons and buttonholes during the construction phase. You'll end up just with a small sample which will look like this, with or without the buttonholes once you've finished. And we're not going to include the lining in this sample, although you can add that if you'd like to at a later stage. You should have these pattern pieces, so the undersleeve and the upper sleeve. And if you're making this on an actual garment, those pieces will be a lot longer. You'll also need to cut some interfacing pieces. I've given those to you if you're following one of my courses, and that interfacing is going to cover the lower part of the undersleeve and the lower part of the upper sleeve. So you'll see the interfacing pieces are just a few millimetres smaller in size than the main pieces, and they just cover those sections there where we'll be adding the mitered corner and the hem. So you want to make sure it covers the fold line here of the vent section and also the hemline here, and the same over here, covering the hemline and the fold line. Cut out your pattern pieces and apply the interfacing to the lower sections. Make sure you've transferred the markings from the pattern. I've used a washable pen to transfer these points, so these are quite important around here where you're pivoting at the seam, where you've got a cross here and here. There's another marker just slightly in from that corner, and also, as you'll notice on my pattern, it asks you to snip in certain places, so snipping either end of the hemline and snipping up here as well for the fold line. On the upper sleeve piece, you've also got a number of markings to transfer, and you can see those in the blue pen here. So where I'm pivoting at this stage, the two crosses there, the circle marker here, the other cross, and again snipping at the points marked here and here, and snipping at the end of the hemming line. First, we're going to miter the corner on the upper sleeve, and what you'll do is folding together along here. So the two snips at the ends meet, and you're folding to this point here on the edge. Then you'll stitch along this edge, stitching from dot to dot. So it should look something like this. And then once you've sewn along that line, just trim away some of the seam allowance. So you'll be left with this. I've also just cut across the corner here to reduce a little bit of bulk. We'll also create the corner on the lower edge of the undersleeve, this corner here. You're going to fold back along the fold line, matching those raw edges there, and you'll stitch from the folded edge up to that dot, as you can see here. And then once you've done that, we're going to trim away some of this section here. So trimming up parallel with the stitch line and then cutting off. When you've finished, it will look like this. So the underside is cut away just up to where the stitching stops and then come off, and the upper side is cut all the way to the end. So you'll have your two pieces ready to sew together. So your upper sleeve and your undersleeve and your corner pieces sewn. Match these two pieces together along the vent edge. I'm going to match them from this end, matching the cross here where you've stopped sewing on both pieces, and matching that vent edge together. So pin from the lower end, right sides together, pinning the vent opening. and you'll stitch along here, so making sure nothing else is caught in, stitching from here along the vent edge, pivoting along the top of the vent opening, and then pivoting again and stitching all the way up your sleeve. So you should have something that looks like this with your stitch line. And if you turn it round the other way, so you're looking at it from the bottom up, just take a snip across this corner here, just through the upper part, not through both seam allowances. This is going to help with the pressing that we're going to do next. Just through the upper layer of your seam allowance, cut in with a sharp pair of scissors right up to that point there, and then you'll be able to open this out, press open the seam allowance above the vent, press the vent to one side, and then turn your hem in on both edges, turn that hem right way out, use a point turner, or I find the end of a small ruler is quite good to get that point out. And then give that section a good press, so pressing here, pressing along the hemline on both edges, pressing this flat, pressing the vent to one side and pressing the seam open above the vent. And it should sit nice and flat from the right side and nice and flat from the wrong side as well. You'll notice I've pressed the seam allowance open here along the vent as well. If you want to at this stage, you can add in those buttonholes. You'll see on my sample here I've got 3 buttonholes that just sit across here, and they're actually decorative. They don't function, they're sewn, the buttons are applied on top, but these buttonholes don't open. You need to do this at this stage before you sew the seam. And then we'll match this seam on this side, pin that right side together, pinning all the way down, open up the seam, match your snips at the bottom of the seam there, pin that in place, and then make sure those raw edges match all the way up here. And then you'll stitch that seam line 1.5 cm in right the way to the bottom edge. And once you've stitched, you'll have your finished seam line like so. Then you can press that seam flat, turn up the raw edge, and repress the hem as well. And you should have then your finished sleeve vent with the mitered corner, and if you've added them on, you'll have your buttonholes here, and then you can choose to add your buttons as well, and then just trim the seam allowances, trim the raw edges, and that's your sample done.